This Lenten season, we have been focusing on the mission of Jesus. We've been saying week after week that is one of organizing a community, or as Jesus showed up on the scene and said, God's kingdom is near. Jesus had burst onto the scene and he told us that he was here to proclaim and to build that good kingdom. And he spent the rest of his earthly ministry doing that very thing. So for the last 6 weeks, we've been turning the prism a little bit more as we've looked at things that Jesus did to organize a community of love. The first Sunday in Lent, we went to the wilderness with Jesus, and we saw just how serious he was about this work. That even through hunger and exhaustion, fasting for 40 days, he resisted the tempter's alternative ways of organizing a community, that he might remain open to God's. And then we listened in as Jesus gave voice to his deep longing for Jerusalem to join in. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have longed to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks. And yet they would not join. Nonetheless, Jesus was not deterred. He continued to organize a community wherever he went, even in places that he had no intention of organizing a community. When he was just passing through, when the opportunity arose, he did the work there too. You may recall the story of Zacchaeus. If I do my job, you'll never forget the story of Zacchaeus. Who was changed through having a one-to-one conversation at his table with Jesus. But we found out that shortly after he was transformed, that everyone around was better because of it. For Zacchaeus gave away half of his wealth and paid reparations to those from whom he had stolen. And we heard just how broad Jesus' community organizing work is when he told the story of the two sons and the father. The one where the younger son squandered all of his wealth in a far-off land, came home and found a deep welcome there. But then there was the older son, the one who had stayed, and even though he had always been there, it seems he was never quite accepted. Jesus left us with an open question. Will you build a community that has enough room for everyone? And last week we heard, as Jesus expanded this work of organizing his kingdom, when he sent 70 ambassadors to do the things that he had done. And we could have looked at other places as well. We could expand this series well beyond the season of Lent. But suffice it to say, in our Gospels, Jesus is serious about organizing God's community in this world. So today, as we speed toward the sorrow and the subdued beauty of Holy Week, we're going to take one more look at the kind of community that Jesus organizes. Up to this point, though, we've focused on the how he does it, through healing, through setting people free, through transforming lives, through calling us, through sending. But today, I want to focus a little bit differently. I want us to notice the characteristics or the marks, the goodness of the community that Jesus is building. For that, we need to take just a little bit of a journey. We're going to leave the hustle and the bustle of city life and abandon the unspoken senses of importance that holy places like Jerusalem convey. Let's leave all of that behind for just a bit. We're not going to travel far, only a few miles out of town. As we get there, though, it's quieter. Doesn't seem quite as important or quite as busy, and yet what is developing is no less important than what happens in Jerusalem. As what was being planned in the outskirts of town would certainly be felt through the halls of power and on every street corner in Jerusalem's limits and beyond. So in the Gospels, where details are usually sparse, we go to the Mount of Olives and we find Jesus meticulously prepared his entry into the holy city. We know from this place outside of town that he commissioned 2 disciples to run an errand for him. But before they went, he gave them very specific instructions that would allow them to anticipate and address the challenges that they would face along the way. After you go and find a colt, as you try to take it, the owner may say to you, "What are you doing taking my colt?" If so, you'll answer in this way. As you take the young colt that has not been ridden, tell the owner that the Lord needs it. As Jesus prepared his entry into Jerusalem, not just any old beast would do. As he prepared, the symbolism of this act mattered deeply. The readers of the ancient prophets would have known exactly why it mattered that this was a young colt that Jesus rode into town. For it was Zechariah, the ancient prophet, who had said, "Rejoice, shout aloud, O Jerusalem. See, your king is coming, triumphant and victorious, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And as he comes, he shall cut off the chariot and the war horse, and the battle bow shall be cut off too. And he shall command peace to the nations." The symbolism of this moment mattered, and Jesus was careful to get it right. So just like the 12 that he had trained up and had sent out first, and the 70 that he sent, the ones we heard about last week, Jesus sent them out once more as a pair to fulfill this important mission. As the 2 went, they encountered the owner's question, as Jesus had said, and things went exactly as planned. So when they returned with the colt, they positioned Jesus on it, and they made their way down the Mount of Olives, making their way toward Jerusalem. As they did, the energy was rising, and the crowds that followed and led began to make a commotion. This was a spectacle to be seen. The people were tearing off their garments and throwing them on the ground in front of him as if they were rolling out a red carpet for the Prince of Peace to make his way into the holy city. And they proclaimed, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory on the highest of heavens." And as I mentioned already, along this road, as Jesus made his way into Jerusalem with the crowd shouting and making the path for him, we get glimpses. We see signs of the kind of community that Jesus organized and that he's still seeking to organize in this world. Let's consider a few of the marks of that community. The first may seem even too obvious to give attention to, but it bears significance. This community that was on the move was formed away from the places of power. It was common folk and those who lived on the margins who gathered around Jesus as he made his way into Jerusalem. That shouldn't be any surprise, though. Throughout the Gospels, those with the power and those with the money had the most trouble understanding and following Jesus. But time and time and time again, those on the margins get it. from their social location on the edges. This community of common folks not only recognized Jesus was the fulfillment of Zechariah's ancient promise, the one that we've heard, but with their own voices, they became part of the storytelling apparatus. They proclaimed the good news through their song. When they shouted, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord," they joined Jesus in telling and enacting the good news. And what they proclaimed was a threat to the powers of death and destruction in this world. Proclaiming Jesus as king was certainly a threat to Caesar, who thought he was both king and God. But it's always been a threat, not just then, but throughout history when faithful people stand up and proclaim Jesus. It is always a threat to those who rule by oppressive power. The spectacle on the street into Jerusalem was a commitment to the peaceful one, and it was an act of resistance against all forces that would rule by oppression. And as they make their way, folks who do that sort of thing know what it is to tap into joy and the energy of this spectacle. And I just have to imagine that their throats were kind of sore from all the shouting that they were taking part in. As that crowd made the way into Jerusalem, we are given signs of the community that Jesus was building and that Jesus is still building. In God's kingdom, in the community that Jesus seeks to build in the world, there is and will always be room for those who are marginalized in the rest of the world. But not simply to be a part, but to have a voice, to be heard, to have the power to proclaim good news. And together, the news they proclaim is still the ancient and yet present word of peace. And that peace is still a threat to all other rulers and authorities. And the community Jesus builds is one marked by joy. All of that points to a community that is capable of changing the narrative. A community that's capable of telling a better story and showing the world a better way. So as it was with the crowd that formed on the outskirts of Jerusalem, this is still who and what we are called to be. We are to be a people who tell a better story than the ones that play out on the 24-hour news cycles every day on our screens and our devices. We are still to be a community that makes space for those on the margins to have a voice. We are still to be a community that proclaims the way of Jesus through what we say, but also in how we show up and how we live in the world. The ways that we challenge powers of death and control when we encounter them. And as we do, I know that we too will be a community with deeper and deeper wells of joy and energy, and we may even have some sore throats too from all of the shouting that takes place. Now, throughout this season of Lent, I've said a whole lot about a listening campaign that will be happening soon, and you didn't think you were getting out of here today without hearing about this once more, I hope. In May, we are developing a team, or currently we're developing a team of listeners who in the months of May and June and into July are going to listen intently for the passions and the interests among us, hearing voices that we have not had the opportunity to hear yet, but listening to the voices of those we might think we know but need to know in deeper ways. I know because I've seen it happen in the past that through this work, we are going to develop a deeper sense of community and connection among us and with people who aren't here yet. This is a powerful tool, a series of tools that we will use to join Jesus in the work of building the good community that this city needs. Now, as I conclude, if we were to keep reading in Luke's gospel, that crowd entered Jerusalem, and then two other things happened pretty quickly after that. And both of them, again, have to do with the kind of community Jesus is building. One, you may recall, he goes into the temple and he flips some tables over, reminding the money changers that they cannot be a barrier to the kind of community that God seeks to build. And the second, Jesus wept. He lamented because Jerusalem, that he so desperately desired to be part of this beloved community, continued to resist and refuse his ways. Jesus, as he made his way into this most crucial of weeks in Jerusalem, wanted nothing more than to organize all of God's beloved children into God's beloved community. And as much as he wanted it then, he still does. Amen.